Today, we're going to look at Inntransit, which is Innovate's container management module, which sits inside of Sage 200. Inntransit is an integrated module that sits inside Sage 200 on top of purchase order processing as standard, and it allows the linking of multiple purchase orders to a single shipping container for tracking of dates and booking in of stock. With Inntransit, we can set up custom stage gates for the container to move through, and also manage changes to any dates from a PO and multi-PO perspective, along with booking in an entire container in one click rather than having to receive multiple purchase orders. This helps get visibility of containers within the Sage 200 system rather than managing these externally in spreadsheets, and also speeds up the entry and management of a container. So Inntransit sits entirely within Sage 200 under our Inntransit menu. We can see we've got some options in here that we're going to take a look at today. So the first thing that we need to do when we get Inntransit installed and set up, and it's really the only configuration we have to do to get using the system, is set up some of our default statuses, fields, and tracking defaults. So with Inntransit, we allow multiple statuses to be set up against a container. We just have to define an initial and a final stage, and we can then define any stages that we like in the middle. And when we do that, we can choose whether these stages allow processing or not. And that means whether they allow for additional tracking notes or if we allow the container to be received at that point. An example of this might be if it's on hold for any reason or quarantined, we wouldn't allow somebody to receive that, so we would untick the allow processing stage. In my demonstration, I've just got the new stage, which a new container will be created under, and the completed stage and an on-hold stage on there. We've then got 3 additional fields that we allow access to the user to set up, and these can have 3 different data types. So I've set some examples up in my system today. So I've set up the port that this container is going to come into, and I've defined a drop down of the main UK port. I've got an extended date, which I've defined as a date which I may use internally to manage an extended outlier date that I might want to report on or keep in mind when I'm looking at my container. And then the third field, I'm actually going to rename this. This was liner, but I'm actually going to call it vessel name. Alongside these additional fields and status, we then have up to 10 tracking defaults. And when we create a container, we'll see these tracking defaults set up and pulled in. We can customize them and change them on a container by container basis, but this allows us to define dates against the various tracking stages. Once that's all saved and set up, we're ready to go. So the first thing we want to do is we want to create a new container. So we go to our container window and we hit a new container. In this screen, we get an automatic container reference. We get a free type container number that's alphanumeric, and we get a container status of that initial status at the top. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to enter container number 123 on there. I can then define an expected delivery date if I know at this point, and the actual delivery date will be populated when the goods are received. And we've then got our 3 custom fields. So I'm going to say that this container is coming in to Liverpool. I'm not going to define an extended date at the minute because I'm not sure what my actual expected date is. And I'm going to give it a vessel name. Good old boaty boat face in there. We've then got the bottom area of our container. Again, we can choose to populate this now, or we can choose to populate this later. So I'm just going to hit save at the minute, and we're going to get a container record. If we then want to get back into that container, we just select it from our drop-down list, either by using the container status field, which is our auto-gen number, or by selecting the container number. If we want to then add lines, we can simply amend the container, and we can see this all opens up for populating. So we've got an order lines tab, which is where we'll see all of our order lines that are linked to this container. We've got our tracking tab, which has pulled through those tracking statuses and allows us to populate an expected natural date as the container moves through the system. And we've got a notes tab, which allows us to add tracking notes for tracking any changes or updates in the container. So if we go back to our order lines, we can just hit the insert key, and that will pop up a list of all of the order lines in the system in the purchase orders that are currently not linked to a container and are currently outstanding. So we can see the order number down the left, the item code that it relates to, the description, quantity, if any of it's been received, and the price, etc. And we can multi-select these lines to add them onto the container. And as we can see, they can be across multiple purchase orders. So we can simply select those 3 lines and add those to the container. Nice and easy. We can add individual lines within this screen, and we can also override the quantity that we might want to add onto the container. So for example, we have order number 3271 here with some double sync units. We're expecting 10 of these to be received. However, there may only be 5 on this container. So in this instance, I can just overwrite that container quantity to 5 and add that line. Once I'm happy with the way the container's been built, I can just hit save and come back to it later. And those lines remain linked. If we go and look at one of these purchase orders, so if we go and look at purchase order 3271, go into our purchase orders list, can then amend that purchase order. What we can see is that line has been linked to the container. So we can see the container reference on the initial grid. Now, if you remember, this had 10 of those sync units on. The way that we handle that so that we don't try and link multiple containers to multiple lines and make the system really confusing is if we enter a part quantity from a purchase order line, we simply just split the remaining quantity out to a separate line with an unlinked line to a container. This linked line, we can edit the item, we can go on, we can change the container, and we can also get into our container tracking as well, which would allow us to really quickly see that expected natural data against those stages as they're updated. If I wanted to add the mixer taps onto this container, I don't have to go back into the container module to do that. I can simply go on and select that container from my dropdown and save this purchase order. If we now go back and inquire in our container, we'll see that that mixer tap is also now linked onto our container. As we add all of these items onto this container record, the total weight at the top is also being updated as we go, so that we've got a running total of what the total weight is of the container. This helps us identify very quickly if we're overweight, if we're going to run out of capacity on there, and if we need to do some jiggling around of what items might be coming on this container. If we go in and amend our container, we're now at a position where we have an idea of when this might come through to us. So we're going to go through and start populating some of these dates. So the container is going to get confirmed at the end of this month. It's then going to be loaded the following week. It's then going to be on water the next day. So we'll put that through to the 8th. And then I expect that it'll be sailing for around a couple of weeks. That's going to come to us on the 30th of September. And at the minute, we're not sure when that final leg's going to be. So when that goes through customs, we're not quite sure when that's going to be. But based on a general idea of that, we're going to update our expected delivery date now, and we're going to populate that through to the 3rd of October. At this point, we can then save this container. And what we get is a prompt to say that the expected delivery date on this container has changed. And therefore, it asks us if we want to update all of the linked purchase order lines to that date. So I'm going to do yes, and that's going to close our container. If we then return back into this purchase order that we were looking at before, and we go into the line, we can now see that that requested delivery date that we use on our purchase orders has been updated to the expected container delivery date. So for any Sage reporting where we're looking at overdue deliveries, at due dates on deliveries, that has been updated on all of the linked lines without having to do those manually across all of the purchase orders. As the container then progresses through the network, all we need to do to keep the system up to date is to simply go in and amend our container to either update the dates as they occur, so this may have left slightly sooner, and add any notes. So we can simply hit insert onto here and add a simple note saying container ready for loading early. And that will just allow us to add a note on there, and it will stamp the user and the date of when that note was made. We then have some other screens that we can use to help manage our containers. So we have a container inquiry. This gives us an overall view of all of our containers in the system, all the lines linked to those containers, the current stage of those containers, and and expected dates as the container moves through the various stages. We can include finalized containers, so any containers that have been fully received, they would be finalized and they would automatically be excluded from this list. We can also get into the container from here as well. So we can go into the container and see all of this information so that we can quickly get in and update any dates as needed. The other thing we can do from our container inquiry is we can see that stage, so we can see that it's now moved to loading and the date that I've confirmed on that loading step. We can also receive the container from here as well. You can either hit receive container to pre-populate with that container reference, or we can go through and receive container through the separate window. If I select our container, I'll put a goods received number in it. I can enter an additional narrative, which is also available in the standard Sage goods received. So we've popped that in there so you can populate that as well and update the receipt date. You can then either go through and update the receipt quantity for each of these lines. Anything not received, again, will be split out onto its own line, not linked to a container. Or we can simply go through and do a full receipt, which will update all received quantities to the expected quantity. Now, when there's hundreds of lines, this makes the receiving of a container really simple. We simply do a full receipt and we will click receive to receive those in. Okay, so now that that container has been received, we can go in and see the individual purchase order lines and make sure they've been received. We also can go into our container inquiry. We see that that container is now dropped off because that's a finalized container, so that's in the completed stage. And we can go in and simply view that line. And if we show our quantities, we can see that those quantities that were on the container have been received. And we can see those GRN numbers and deliveries on the individual line as though we'd done that in Sage on each of the individual purchase orders. The final option that we've got within our Inntransit module is the ability to import data. So for those that have large volumes of data that do want to do a mass import of container information, if they get sent spreadsheets containing loading lists and things from their freight providers, we can import new containers, we can import container lines, and we can actually import the receipt of containers as well. So there's some standard template files that the system will generate in Excel, which you can populate then to import files to perform these three functions. If you're interested in Inntransit, you can go to our website and go under solutions and hit Inntransit. Container management. We'll be adding a bit more information around this as well. And you can get in touch with us or your account manager, and we can get you some more information and a more tailored demo if you like.